Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's been enjoying the conference. Lots of great sessions, and we got another one here today. Before we get started, just want to start with a land acknowledgement that the city of Halifax is situated in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. Welcome, everyone. We've got a great session here around data. The session is titled Data for Increased Equity and Impact. We've got 3 presentations. Each presenter will give about 20 minutes. And rather than having a Q&A following each presentation, we'll just save it for the end. We'll have about 30 minutes, and I'll circulate with the microphone. So my name is Doug Pawson. I'm the Executive Director within Homelessness St. John's and a member of the Board of Directors with CIEH. Our presenters today, I had a list here of the order I thought it would be in. It is not that order, so bear with me here. We'll get started with Monica Weber and Carter Tongs with Carleton University, and they'll lead us off speaking around mapping homelessness in Toronto. We'll jump to Jeffrey Messier with the University of Calgary, and he'll be presenting on the linking agency client records and protecting privacy. And we'll wrap up with my friend Jonathan, who gave me the grace of telling me right away I'm not going to be able to pronounce his last name properly, with the CAH, and Jonathan will be presenting on data justice, doing homelessness data justice using a by-name list. So I'm really looking forward to the presentations, and please welcome and joining our first presenters, Carter and Monica.
That should be okay. Sorry, everyone, I'm recording this for my mom. She's really excited to see it. Thank you very much, Doug, for your introduction. I just wanted to begin today by thanking the Mi'kmaq people for their, unceded land that we are on today. I myself reside in the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in Ottawa, and the research that we're presenting today was conducted in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And we just wanted to take a moment to recognize that we know that Indigenous folks are overrepresented in our homeless populations in Canada, and that without a decolonization framework, it's going to be really hard for us to address the problem that we're all here to solve today. So my name is Carter Tongs. I am a master's student in the Department of Sociology at Carleton University, and I am working on this project with Monica, who will introduce herself in a moment. And our goal here was really to map services in Toronto, looking at where they're located as well as the barriers in accessing those from the perspective of those accessing the services. And I will turn it over to Monica.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Monica Weber. Prior to my being a person with lived experience of homelessness for just over a decade, I was a IT professional and with a specialty in digital forensics. And then in about 2 seconds or less, homelessness struck, and orienting to that was really hard. And one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this project is because, I was just dumped into a culture, and I had no idea what my resources were, how anything could help me. I had no idea. And that was probably, I'm going to say, 8 years of just floating around, not knowing any of the services that were out there. So I'm going to suggest, certainly today, with the homelessness problem the way it is, which is more so than it was back when that was affecting me, there are a lot of people out there who have no idea what to do, how to do it, who don't have access to the data that they need in order to really understand how to help themselves. And I'm going to suggest that if I had had data available to me at the time, I could have been off the system years prior than I was. So that's why this project is really, really important to me. So the outline, we're going to take a look at context, purpose and motivation of the study, research, design and methods, early findings, and future research plans. So for context, I'm going to tell you complexity of services, that's a big one. The burden of navigating the system, not recognizing for about 7 years that there was food available to me that I didn't know was there, but was there. Many services are invisible and inaccessible without specific criteria being met. It was kind of like, I don't know if you guys ever got when you were younger, or when your kids came home from school and they had those insurance forms, and it was like, you know, if you have 6 fingers on one hand and half a foot on the other hand, and these are the things that you get to qualify for this amount of money. It felt so much like that in this system as well. Services vary from area to area. Some places don't have any access, for instance, to, I'm going to say, ID clinics. Without ID clinics, you can't get into food banks. Without food banks, I'm not quite sure what you would do insofar as food insecurity. So looking at gaps in that, reliance on service workers to be knowledgeable and share accurate information about the services that are out there. There are a couple of issues with that. I'm going to say some of the service workers, they don't know what the services are available, or they don't know how to apply those services to a situation that they've never lived in before in their lives. And some of them are suffering from, like burnout. And some of them just have no idea what it's all about. They don't understand the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness that can come along with being homeless for an extended period of time. Siloed services, lack of integration of services. You may have a service over here, a service over here. The two don't match. You all know this, I'm pretty sure. It can force individuals to access multiple services at one time, and it can be, most definitely can be discretionary. Services can be concentrated in certain areas, and those outside of those areas are less known. They're less known, or they're inaccessible or invisible. Limited or no accessibility for those experiencing deep poverty. There is nothing more frustrating than recognizing that there is an out. There's an out. I could do this. I can do this. But then going to a service provider and them going like, no. And you're like, but I could. This could help me. No, just no. Is that you?
No, it's you.
Oh, that's me too. All right then. Purpose and motivation. Benefits of the platform, providing transparency for service users. So what we're looking at is a mapping system that allows service users to be able to understand where they can get the services that they need. So, and this mapping system will provide concise information regarding services available, accessibility, the hours that things are open. There's nothing more frustrating than not having any form of transportation and going someplace and man, you can't get in. Conditions, barriers to access. There are conditions, for instance, again, back to the food bank, if you don't have any kind of ID and you can't access the food bank, but it's very many times it happens that you don't have ID when you're homeless. Service users are not reliant on case managers or staff for knowledge and details of services and can self-direct, and decrease in time spent for service workers in providing information to service users. Whoops. Thank you. That's you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Monica, very much. So now I'm going to talk about a little bit about our research design, what questions we asked, and how we went about trying to get at those questions. So our first questions were, what services are people experiencing homelessness accessing? And where are they accessing them? And in addition to that, what are the barriers they're facing when they're trying to access these services? So what we did first is Monica and I spent countless hours looking at organization websites, as well as 211, Toronto Central Healthline, stuff like that. And we looked at what the services were, where they were, their contact information, the programs they offer, and stuff like that as well. We then went through and created a code book where we looked at how to tag the services effectively, so you would be able to go in and say, I'm looking for a health service, and then you could look at, okay, I'm looking for harm reduction, but I'm looking specifically for harm reduction supplies, or I'm looking for a treatment clinic or something like that. So we have a whole bunch of tags. Monica took the lead on it, which was super, super helpful. Her perspective was incredibly valuable. And so some of the tags that we have housing, that would then be subcategorized into shelters, emergency shelters versus long-term shelters, income services, nourishment, social services, mental health and addictions, and all of these have several subcategories within them. These are just kind of a snapshot of the ones we have. We have a very long list of the services themselves. So after we did that big long list, we went to Toronto and we did focus groups at a couple of different organizations in Toronto. And we asked service users about their needs and their ability and experiences accessing the services. And we focused on a couple of different areas in Toronto because we wanted to recognize that in different areas there are different services available and different services that are accessible, and some of those have different requirements depending just on where you are in Toronto. And we also wanted to ask about outcomes for gaining independence directly related to these resources and what was helpful for our participants and what wasn't. We also use this as a little bit of a confirmation for our list. We wanted to go in and say, this service says that it's there. Is it actually there? Is it there in the way that it's presented? How and where individuals were accessing the systems? How and where service users were experiencing gaps to the services that they required, and asking how the information that we're gathering can best be presented. And then we have this wonderful Google My Map that I'll show you in just a second, which provides a really cool kind of visual snapshot of where the services in Toronto are located that we found. And this allows us to have a really quick reference for ability. The way that we're going to present it today is kind of all of the services. Our hope is to kind of differentiate by color and things like that. So this is our preliminary findings. So this represents a whole bunch of services that we have in Toronto. We had to zoom out quite a bit. But as you can see, there's a huge, huge concentration of services, more collected towards downtown Toronto. And as you kind of get further out, they become a little bit more disparate and stuff like that. As I said, this is just all of the services. They're not differentiated at this point. So this includes things like food banks, shelters, ID clinics, OW offices, everything like that. Our hope is to be able to color code it later so that we can kind of look at specific services. And so we have over 400 services at the moment that are mapped, and we have been working with 211 to access some of their data in terms of other services that we may not have been able to map. We've had issues with some services not having websites or having really old information. I saw so many program descriptions from 2019, and I was like, it's 2023. Is this program working this way still? We don't know. So as I said, we saw the concentration of services. We were also astounded at the sheer amount of these services. And we were kind of if there are all these services available, what's the problem? What's not working if we have all of these things available? We had a lack of information online in terms of accessibility, up-to-date information, as I said. And we also had a lot of variation in terms of definitions and terminology that were used by different services. So some services would have harm reduction, but they would just say harm reduction and not explain what services they provide, whereas others would go in and say, oh, we have naloxone kits available, we have a safe injection site available, things like that. And we were just seeing like a lot of variation in terms of how service providers were actually terming and identifying their services for folks. So now I'm going to pass it off to Monica to talk about our focus groups.
So, yeah, our service users' feedback regarding gaps in services. We noticed that they would discuss this or try and discuss this with case managers and so on and so forth, and they weren't necessarily taken seriously, and there were some pretty large gaps there. So access to services may involve the following barriers. They were either unknown, inaccessible, too far away, not accessible in one way or another. Yeah, there was something that impacted me quite a bit along the way when we were doing one of the focus groups, and that was people who were experiencing homelessness. And there was a talk about, like people would randomly be transferred from one shelter, let's say, to an entirely different city, entirely different area, to another shelter. So they may have already been oriented to the services within the area that they were in, and then that would all be lost. So whether they had a network of people that they were relying on, if they had, resources that they were relying on, maybe they were taking courses. Maybe there were a bunch of different things. Maybe they have to re-register with absolutely everything they do, and maybe there were no services and resources that were the same, because the services and resources, they changed from area to area. So yeah, let me just reorient myself to the slide, because I kind of went on a tangent with that because I kind of feel it. Yeah, a big one here is needing to rebuild a trusted network. It's really hard to have any kind of a trusted network in the first place. So if transferring from one place to another place and you've got to start all over again, and I'm gonna say my cognitive abilities, they just died, right? Here I go again. The trauma and stuff like that and just being overwhelmed was just so much, I couldn't think at all. So trying to navigate these services and, somebody was saying this over here and that over there, and then trying to figure out who I could trust and what I could trust, that was a big stretch. And I'm stable now. I've been stable for about 3.5 years. And I'm going to tell you, my cognition is back. I can think, I can work, I can do all the things that I used to be able to do. I can't begin to stress the impact of the stress that comes with being homeless. And it's not even necessarily not having 4 walls and a ceiling. It's like this random stuff of, maybe you could do this and maybe you can do that, and here, go over here for this service, and then finding out that service doesn't actually exist. And it's like, oh my God, are you kidding? It's so chaos. Yeah, and man, it's no wonder I couldn't think. And I'm thrilled that I have my brain back, but I'm so goddamn mad about all of this. It doesn't need to be happening, and it is, and it shouldn't be. And I'm just gonna reorient again. Yeah, there were a lot of issues too when we were talking in the focus groups about, people have their belongings in like a bag, and they can't travel around everywhere with a bag. Like it's too much. It's too much. So then they would have to find places for their bag, and they would lose their bag because somebody else would steal their bag because other homeless people don't have things, so they would steal stuff. And everything just becomes this huge problem. Everything is just a problem. So clearly that's going to lead to emotional impact, cognitive decline. And that's not fully understood. I'm going to say not even marginally understood by service workers, where then people would be facing the hostility of the service workers because, you're not thinking right. There's too much. It's overwhelming. It's too much to handle. So then comes disorientation, hopelessness, failure to thrive, and I'm going to tell you, I experienced all of those things. Grief, I don't think I got to that until after I was back and basically self-sufficient again, probably still going through it based on the tears. So that may cause, the emotional impacts may cause service workers to interpret service users as not trying. And then that becomes a whole different, excuse my French, shit show in and of itself. Because once you're targeted by the service workers, man, life might as well be over. So that is going to, I say here, may impact. No, it's going to impact the level of engagement and support from service workers. So that can include transitional housing, where everybody is like, hey, you need to work with the service workers. And man, we're just trying to hold on for dear life to our anything that we have. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to collect myself for a second here. Service workers, thank you. Conflicting information, I'm just going to read it and then I'll figure out where I'm at right now. Conflicting information may have differing levels of awareness of helpful. Oh, so yeah, the service workers. I was just in the CAEH training talk. And someone there with lived experience, and I had never put this into words, but someone there with lived experience said, like, the service workers, people would go to different service workers because the service workers weren't always available at the same time. And then, one person would say one thing, and then another worker would say another thing, and another one would say another. And the idea with the CAH training thing was, these people are not trained, and they need more training. From my point of view, they were screwing with my head, and my head was already screwed as it was. So there's that consistency that really is needed when someone is compromised in a way that one is compromised when homeless. Discretionary access to services. Services may be available to some and not to others. Valuable information, often more available through word of mouth between service users. So about 8 days in, I'm just going to slow down again. About 8 years into my stint with homelessness, I finally found a community. And that was through someone who came in and literally brought the community to people who wanted it. And in that community, I found resources that in the time that I had experienced connection with service workers, I had never recognized that these resources were available to me. So a lot of times it's between peers where people say, hey, this is really important. Oh, sorry. 5 minutes. Negative interactions with service providers reduce willingness to access services. So again, if targeted because you're not working so well with it, then that's not good. We noticed in the focus groups as well, there was a dichotomy. There was one place in particular that everybody was like, man, I won the lottery by getting here. And I was just like, wow, never heard that before. And then there was another one where it was like absolutely hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And the question is why that happens. So emotional impact on service users with limited resources is a limited sense of purpose, disorientation, despair, hopelessness, isolation, and learned helplessness. Service users with access to resources, and again, we go back to the map, service users with access have a sense of purpose, oriented towards goals, excited about the future, and feels positively connected with fellow service users and service workers. That's a big deal. My apologies for going over.
Oh, no, that was wonderful. So after we had asked folks about their experiences accessing services and their challenges, we said, hey, we want to build this huge database, and how should we share this information with you? What is the best way to do that? So the biggest thing we found is that they were like, you need to have it accessible in thousands of different ways. It can't just be one way because it will be accessible to some folks and not to others. Many people said pamphlets would be really helpful, and we actually had the suggestion of having them be a little bit more neighborhood specific, so that you wouldn't just get like this giant book of like all the services in Toronto, but they would be specific to where you were located. And so that was something that was really interesting. They also said to have like a physical map like we had with the My Map that was color coded, and again they wanted this to be district or neighborhood specific. We're still working on like what the best way to kind of differentiate that would be. A website and an app, a lot of folks said would still be really helpful, as a lot of our participants did have access to either computers or cell phones or something like that. And one of the things we found, particularly for refugees and new immigrants to Canada, was that this information needs to be available in multiple languages. If you come to Canada and you don't speak English, and the only way that you can access ESL services is by a poster that's put up in English, not super helpful. And in all capitals, just the need for this information to be more available. We are also hoping, and a lot of our participants also said that they would really like if service workers had access to this information, so that they had up-to-date information of what the services were, how accessible they were, what you needed, so that when you get to the service, you're not surprised by, something closing 10 minutes early and you weren't expecting that. So in future, we're going to continue to add to our existing list. We want to be able to provide a list of programming that is available at the different services, so that you can kind of see, okay, like there are harm reduction supports here, but maybe not here, so maybe that needs to be something that's developed, and provide more information to service users about where they can kind of target their funding and target their service development. We did our focus groups a couple weeks ago, so we are still analyzing and looking at the feedback that we collected. And then we want to confirm our list again with service providers to look at transparency around the services offered and not offered, more clear clarification of like what is required to access the services. We're also planning on reaching out to some tech companies in terms of like the actual development. Shockingly, none of us are great with computers. I tried to upload this slide, it was horrible. And figuring out how to develop a platform that is accessible and is useful for service users and service providers as well. Should I just keep going? Okay, yeah. So we have some questions for you guys today. So as we know, there are things like 211. There was Chalmers. Chalmers actually doesn't exist anymore, we found out like a couple days ago. The company lost funding. And so we're looking at one, like how can our database be different from other ones? How can it be different from 211? How can it be more accessible? I don't know if any of you have like looked at 211, but when I look at 211, it's really ugly and so confusing because it's like just a lot of very small print. And so looking at things like that. And we're also looking for ideas about networks that we can tap into, whether that be alliances or coalitions or things like that, where we can access more service providers and get more data that way. And also about updating and keeping this information up to date. We know that's a big challenge for a lot of service providers because you like just don't have the capacity to do that, and ensuring that we have some consistency in language and stuff like that as well. Thank you. And that's all we have for you today.
Thank you, Carter and Monica. And Monica, thank you for sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
And putting into terms, really clear terms, things that I think are often lost on a lot of service providers and folks working in the sector. I really appreciate your.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, we'll upload. Who's got this? Up next, we've got Jeffrey, let's say from the University of Calgary. And I'm also terrible with technology, so I'll leave it to you. I think you know this.
Thank you. So I'm from as I pull up my slides, from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Calgary. And so as an engineer, I always find like I have to explain what I'm doing here, first of all. And I also feel, I just want to share that engineers have trouble with IT just like everybody, and I feel as though I live under this unreasonable expectation that my Zoom always has to work, the slides always have to be great. It's just not that way. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about how to link agency client records and protect privacy. And before I get started, I'm grateful to be visiting you from my home in Treaty 7 country. And before that, I was born and raised in Saskatchewan near the Cypress Hills in Treaty 4 country on the lands of the Niconeat First Nation. And I'm really grateful to have always lived in that country. Home for me looks like dry land with hills. I find the water out here beautiful, but disconcerting somehow. So I can swim and all that, but anyways. So I'd like to say a quick thank you to the agencies that have made a lot of our work possible, particularly in this case, the Calgary Homeless Foundation. I'll be talking about their data a lot. And to kick things off, so the reason why I find myself here is as an engineer, a lot of my work is trying to talk about how data and technology can be used to make your work easier. And I try to come from a perspective of, in a way, harm reduction with technology. I'm not going to try to propose a bunch of this sort of technology utopia of linked systems and everything works great. I want to present some hopefully practical ideas that you can get working in the data ecosystem that we have today. And one of the facts of life in our current data ecosystem is fragmentation. We have many agencies, many different, on the face of it at least, incompatible IT systems, but we can still sort of join them together sometimes. And particularly around record linkage, consent to share may not always have been collected. We also don't have a standard identifier like the healthcare system. There is no sort of provincial health number. We have names and we have birth dates. And there's a lot of challenges around using those names and birth dates to link data, and I'll talk about it. All that said, there's a lot of benefit still to merging records. On the individual level, if you're working with a person at a particular agency, it's useful to understand that person's whole story, to understand their complete experience. And if you can get data together without getting that person to tell their story yet again, there's benefit often to that person. At a group or a high-level population, or at a sort of a population level, there's benefit if you're a system planner or you're trying to understand how the overall housing and homelessness system of care works. How do people flow between all of the many agencies that we have helping them? What programs are working well and what programs are not working well? We can learn this from merging data together from these agencies. But privacy and consent is huge. And I'm going to say for the purposes of this presentation, my default assumption is that if you don't have consent, you can't merge identifying information. And by identifying information, I mean someone's name and someone's birthday, right? In plain text. But, for those of you who have worked in the sector, it's not always so black and white, right? The decision to share someone's information changes depending on everybody's individual situation. Is it a matter of safety? Is there a matter of what's reasonable or not reasonable? What kind of consent? Did somebody tell somebody that they consented, or do you have a fully written legal document? There's a lot of good discussion that is kind of beyond the time that we have to chat about. But one document that I found really thoughtful was a document that the Calgary Homeless Foundation, some other Calgary agencies, and PolicyWise put together on an ethical decision-making framework for information sharing. That QR code is a link to the document, and it's really worth a read. I really appreciated it. So now I'll pause for the QR code. But to sort of keep moving along, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, first of all, by talking about what information sharing looks like at the individual level, and then I'm going to talk about how we can go on to merge information for groups. And in particular, when we're merging information for sort of like a high-level population analysis, we don't actually need to know who the people are, right? If you're looking at how people flow through the system of care in Halifax or Calgary, you don't need to assign names, but you do need to connect records. And we still have to work with the names and the birth dates to do that connection, even though once they're linked, we can delete that identifying information. So starting out with an example of merging at the individual level. Let's say I access agency A, I'm working with somebody, and I give consent to agency A to gather my information from agency B. So what does data look like? In our case, most often it looks like a table, right? When people interact with an agency, usually there's a row created in the table to record that interaction. So in this example, there's an ID number. I have ID number at agency A 101. There's a timestamp. I'm talking to them on January 10th at the top of the table. My name's there, and then there's some more data. Similar kind of data is recorded about me and others in agency B. Usually timestamp, usually name, but the ID numbers typically won't match because the IT systems are different, right? So I give consent. How does information merging work at the most basic level? Somebody from agency A calls somebody from agency B on the phone and says, hey, I'm working with Jeff. Jeff has consented to granting information or to sharing his information, and can you send over his records? And agency B person is, no problem, I'm going to look up Jeff in the system. There he is, ID number 30, GEOFF. But hey, there's also somebody that's spelled JEOFF who is in on January 15th. Can you ask Jeff if he was in on the 15th? And I'll say, yeah, I was actually. And people spell my name with a J all the time. And that's me as well, right? So there was a conversation here that went around not only pulling the information, but recognizing that names, if we're matching based on names don't always match. Now, that was a lot of discussion, a lot of phone calls. So how can we kind of automate this with a machine? So this is where we sort of move into more of a nerd moment. And so we can spot the similarity between Jeff with a G, Jeff with a J. How does a computer do it? Well, a computer can do the same thing using something called an edit distance. And basically the way an edit distance works, there's a whole bunch of different kinds. But one of the more common ones is it just counts the number of characters that you have to change to turn one word into another, right? So Jeff with a G is changed to Jeff with a J by changing one character. So those two words are separated by a distance of 1. Jeff with a G and Jeffrey with no O has a distance of 5 because to change that word, the word on the left to the word on the right, you need to make one substitution, drop the O, and add REY. And so computers can calculate these distances to get an idea of how similar two records might be. And when you go to pull records, you can pull not only the exact matches, but you can pull records that are similar. So this work was done in collaboration with the Calgary Homeless Foundation. And for those of you not familiar with Calgary, the CHF is basically sort of a system level entity. And one of the things the CHF does is runs an information system called HMIS. It's kind of like HIFIS, if you're familiar with HIFIS. And that same information system is used by multiple agencies and multiple shelters in the city. So all the data actually is aggregated at the Calgary Homeless, or it's gathered at the Calgary Homeless Foundation, but not necessarily merged. So if two agencies don't have, or if an agency doesn't collect consent to necessarily merge information, then the data resides at the CHF, but it doesn't necessarily get merged with other agencies, and it doesn't get shared with other agencies, even though it's a common system. But it does allow us, from a research perspective, to study how similar records are between agencies, because they all happen to be in one spot. And so Calgary Homeless Foundation staff manually checked for duplicate and similar records for 375 people across 144 different services. So 375 people were chosen at random. And then using this edit distance, they pulled up the most similar records to those randomly chosen people, and then just made a judgment call as to whether or not these records were the same person. When we looked at the number of duplicates, 40% had no duplicates, so truly one person that accessed one agency. But the rest had one or more duplicate profiles. So these are people that have accessed more than one agency, or perhaps the same agency more than once, and their name was just spelled differently. If we look at how similar these matches were, 46% were identical, so exactly the same name, just different agencies. But a bunch of them, the other half, had at least some sort of change or misspelling. And sort of anecdotally, the low distance matches, like a distance of 1 or 2 characters, tended to just be misspellings, Dave, David, Jeff, Jeffrey kinds of things. The higher distance matches were full name changes, like somebody using a completely different first name or a completely different last name. Now, it's important to acknowledge that people giving different names it's a survival strategy, right? It's a micro strategy, and it's a way that people protect their privacy when they have very little other ways to protect their privacy. And so, you know, this business of sort of spotting these close matches, as I'm going to say, we're going to extend this to work with scrambled names and birth dates, so you can't actually read the names of the people, but you can still merge them to do that population level analysis. But on an individual level, this can only be done if you truly receive consent from the person, right? So this is not something that you sort of run in the background to sort of catch out people. If you're working with plain text names that haven't been scrambled, you have to have consent to do this. So, but let's move on then. So that's what happens at the individual level, but what if we want to just sort of examine how everybody in Calgary uses the housing and homelessness system of care? Well, we'd like to merge everybody so we can see how people move across services. And we have to do it with names and birth dates because we have nothing else to work with, but we also need to preserve privacy. And so the way around this is to scramble the names and birth dates, right? Encrypt or scramble the names. And you can't just use any old scrambling method because you still, after scrambling, want to be able to spot the names that are similar, right? Over half of the records were not quite identical, so you still need to spot similarities. And there's a special technique called Bloom filtering that allows you to do this, so you can still spot similarities. And so this is where sort of we came in at the university. What happened was the Calgary Homeless Foundation applied this Bloom filter scrambling to their data and then provided us with the scrambled names and birth dates. They also provided us with the scrambled manual matches, so we didn't have access to the full names, but we had access to the scrambled names. And we just sort of did the simplest possible thing, which is calculating the similarity, and if the similarity is above a threshold, we said this is the same person. If it's below a threshold, it's not. And it doesn't work perfectly. 31% of the identified matches were incorrect when we compared it to the manual data set. We missed 17% of the matches in the data. But if you're doing sort of like a population level analysis, every match doesn't have to be totally perfect, and you can do better than the threshold test. So just so if you're at an agency or if you're within a system of care and you're interested in merging data to sort of analyze flow between programs, here's a little bit of a case study, right? So Agency A and Agency B have decided to merge their data, not to sort of identify individuals, but just to kind of see how groups are flowing between programs. So what they do is they use this Bloom filter scrambling utility. Where did they get it? They got it from me, actually. I've got one. And if you want it, you can have mine. And they agree on a secret key. They scramble the data, and now Agency A is going to send everything over to Agency B. Stop. Don't do it that way. The reason why not is because the two agencies that have access to the plain names can't also have access to another agency's scrambled name. So for example, Agency A has the names Jeff, Kermit, and Fozzie, and then the scrambled versions of those. if agency B sends their scrambled data over, we already know who to look for if we want to spot Jeff, Kermit, and Fozzie in agency B's data, right? So if you've got access to the plain text names and the scrambled names side by side, you cannot have access to somebody else's scrambled names, or you'll just be able to reverse the scrambling, right? So this does not protect privacy. The way around that is to use a third party, right? And so who is this third party? It's another agency. It's a system planner. Universities are great partners because they tend to be free. And the way it has to work is agency A and B scramble their data. They send the scrambled data to the third party. And the two rules are the third party can't have the secret key, and the third party can't have the plain text names, which is pretty obvious when you're working with a university. You don't give anybody at a university plain text names. And the second rule is that agency A and B can't share data back and forth. So what happens is the third party will merge the data and then do the system level analysis, and aggregated results can be shared back to the agencies, right? They can say, yeah, you know, here's the number of people per day that move from agency A to agency B, for example. So just to finish up with a little bit of a case study to show kind of the impact of this, we did this with a 10-year data pull from the Calgary Homeless Foundation data set. We focused just on shelter data, so 8 different shelters, 10 years of data, 78,000 unique records, I'll say, in the data set. And all the data was Bloom filter scrambled that we received. And so one of the things that we might want to do as system level planners or system level analyzers is sort of look at the per person shelter access statistics. And so if we run it on this unmerged data set and we look at the entire cohort, the average number of days spent in shelter was 87.8. The median number of days was 10. But if we look at the top 5% of the heaviest users in the system, you know, the so-called, you know, chronic system users, those numbers jump way up, right? So if you look at the top 5% of system users, the average number of days in shelter is a little over 1,000. The median number is about 2 years. And that 5% is responsible for 58% of the total stays in shelter. And no one's going to be surprised by this if you work in shelter, right? You know that a small number of people are the ones using the greatest number of systems. And these are typically the people that we really target with our programs. So if you do this sort of threshold merging, what we found was the 78,000 people we thought we had were actually only 50,000 people. So there's a big reduction in just your total population of people that you think that you have in your system. And if we compare the statistics before and after the merge, so the before merge, those are the numbers on the previous slide, I just reproduced them here. And then the numbers after the merge, if you look in particular at the heavy system users, they jump by about 50%, right? So the average number of shelter stays goes from about 1,000 to about 1,500, and the median jumps kind of by a similar amount. So if you're doing system planning, particularly focusing on really heavy system users, super important that you merge that data. So to conclude, this is, if you want to talk to me more about this, that's the QR code for my website. So this is my email address. It's basically my business card, I guess. But I just want to conclude with a couple of things. First of all, I do think that merging records is important, especially if you're doing sort of system level planning. You know, this is, again, kind of your nerd moment, I guess, right? Because here I was talking about all this stuff. But I want to emphasize that this works with a variety of IT setups. If all you have is spreadsheets, this will work with spreadsheets. It doesn't work in real time, right? But you run the scrambling utility. Like I said, I can give you one that works with spreadsheets. You scramble your spreadsheet. Somebody else scrambled their spreadsheet. You make a friend at the university. You send your spreadsheet. You know, if you've got ethics approval for like a bit of a research project with them. They'll do some analysis on it, and then they'll come back and say, this is what your system looks like, right? And maybe that you can use that for program analysis or study. You can get way fancy with this. We can talk about machine learning. I can do all that kind of stuff with this linkage. I love that sort of thing. But it doesn't have to be complicated. This can be simple and it can be cheap. But I can't make generalizations because I don't know if we've got 100 people in the room. You've got 100 different IT systems. So if you're interested, if this sounds like it has value, please talk to me after or send me an email or contact me. I'm easy to find on the internet. And I would love to chat with you about the specifics of that. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that. I kept trying to peek over to see the slides so I can't see the screen. But all of those slides will be posted online after the conference. Welcome, Jonathan, to speak around data justice and the use of by name lists. Over to you.
Yeah. No. Do you know where it is? In presentations, maybe? No. You don't know where she? Yeah. Thank you. No. I don't think so. No, not this one. Go away. Not this one. Yeah, I just don't, like, she was supposed to get it up, but... yeah, I can just do it from the... I would have badmouthed the people who organized this thing, but yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I'm sure they're doing their best. Okay. So, everyone, so, yeah, my name is Jonathan Al-Sheikh. Doug?
You're right, I couldn't get that. You're right, you told me right away.
And I am the data lead for Build for Zero in the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And thank you so much for coming. And it's so amazing to see like such a big room with people who want to hear about data and data issues and, amazing presentations. Really looking forward to the Q&A. So I will try to be brief and allow us as much time. Doing homelessness, data justice, pun intended. What is data justice? There are multiple definitions, and it's a trending term. Even there are like university professorships offered for people who specialize in data justice and so forth. It's fair and equitable treatment of individuals and communities as pertains collection, analysis, and use of data. It's really ensuring power imbalances, discrimination, exploitation, structures of oppression, and stigma are systematically addressed and mitigated. It's the very general idea that data is very relevant for social justice, that the use of data across the data ecosystem is always ethically and normatively involved. The idea that tremendous harm can be caused through the use of data, that significant risks can be generated by the use of data, and being very aware of that, and being very systematic about how we identify those risks and how we mitigate them. It's really having that in our mind at all times. At the same time, doing it in a genuine way. We live at a moment of virtue hoarding. People like to be very invested in showcasing and performing virtue. There is a difference between doing it performatively and doing it for real. And doing it performatively is way easier. So how do we care about that but don't fall into a place of just saying the right buzzwords, of just going through the right gestures, and which all too often is just having access to the money to do those gestures, or having access to going to the good university that teaches you how to say the required buzzwords. So how do we do it genuinely, and how do we disconnect or decouple class from genuine interest in social justice and how it pertains to data? I really, really liked Jeff's concept of a harm reduction approach to technology. I think this is an extremely productive one. Thank you for this. And it's a very productive way of thinking how we can do it. The idea of harm reduction, that harm is, in a sense, even unavoidable, but we need to keep that in mind, minimize that, mitigate that, and so forth. The idea that ethics and normative considerations is only about how data is used is wrong. This separation of facts from value judgments, something that was extremely strong in the first half of the 20th century, now we do know better. We do know that facts don't exist separately in some pre-ethical world. We don't first have facts and then do good things or bad things with them. Data is never value-free. It's never normatively neutral. There are always decisions about definitions, about data collection processes, how we clean the data, store and structure the data, management of access to data, analytic strategies, visualizations. All of those things have considerable ethical consequences. And they always assume, at least implicitly, normative principles. We make decisions in the categories we include, for example, because we constitute the reality along those categories. If we decide there are just 3 racial groups, we force people to self-identify in a certain way, and we then have a society in which there are just 3 groups. And that can have certain normative consequences. Groups can disappear that way, and groups can appear that way. And all of those things have consequences. And being reflecting on those things. And that's just about categories. At any decision we make have some consequence which we want to be very clear about having identified it, having thought about it, and thought who might be harmed or put at risk or being disadvantaged by those things. And remembering some people are extremely well positioned to voice their distress and misgivings. Other people are never in a position to say anything. And we need to think, who are we serving that is very efficiently loud about what they don't like? And who are we serving that actually has no ability to voice what they believe is harmful? And how can we make sure that we think about those things and approach it effectively? Like, I don't know the answer to those challenges, right? Like, that's part of the conversation we need to have. Now, in Built for Zero, Canada, we look at data justice as an integral part of data quality. We have 9 dimensions of quality of data, and one of them is justice, and it's on an equal footing with all other dimensions of data quality. Now, often justice is not included as part of the dimensions of data quality, following that assumption that ethics and justice is relevant to the use of the data, not to the very fact that the data is of quality. And we really want to center justice aspects by saying that if the data is unjust, it's not quality data. These are our dimensions of quality data. You can also find it on our website. So justice data was collected, stored, transformed, analyzed, visualized in ways that do not reproduce, enhance, or entrench social inequities or oppression. But also, I highlighted transparency. It's perfectly clear what question or prompt generated each value in the data. The full procedures used for collecting the data, storing it, transforming it, such as cleaning, and analyzing it are known and available to anyone who wants to understand the data. There are no black boxes. Everything in the data can be explained in full, and there is a paper trail of how each value came about. Data is made available to interest holders, to support, and to homelessness. The idea of transparency is deeply connected with data justice and ethics. The idea that everything is very clear. When I have values, I know how we ended up with them, and it's surprising how often that's not the case. We are not sure what actual question, what actual prompt generated the values we have. What exactly were people asked? What did people understand in what they were asked? Being reflective that we have a lot of assumptions that we might not be thinking about when we see values, such as that we know exactly what they were asked and what they understood in that question, and so forth. The ability to have a paper trail and audit, the ability to really challenge data, to really say, I don't trust anything, I don't believe anything, I want to know that you are really right, and you have the ability to give me all that I need to do that legwork, to convince myself that this is really true, as opposed to situations where you just need to trust. And we don't live in a very trusting moment, and I don't think anyone here would say, yeah, let's just start trusting, all will be good, right? We know why we don't trust. And we want to be transparent about data quality. How do we know the quality of our data? How do we know? How is the quality of the data monitored and measured? Do we monitor the quality of the data over time? And are we being transparent about our data quality indicators? Obviously, in a moment, I'll show how we try to do somewhat of a good job there. But these are bigger questions than, of course, our limited and, for the moment, solutions. How do we know the quality of our data for real? Like, what are the reasons we can really say, yes, I am trusting, I am convinced this is indeed quality data? What do I use to monitor and measure it? Like, I should have explicit, transparent ways to say why and how. And do I remember data might not stay quality? Do I remember the over time element? Did I just once made sure that things are really good and assume from now on they keep on working as they should? Or do I bear in mind that that might not at all be the case, and it was good, but it's no longer so? How do I know? Our uncritical use of low quality data is unethical. So data justice is part of data quality, but if I have low quality data and I'm either unaware of it or I'm aware of it and I don't care, I'm actually being unethical. If I use it uncritically, certain actionable insight can sometimes be extracted from some types of lower quality data. Lower quality data is sometimes useful, sometimes all we have. We can do lots of things, but we want to know what we're working with. The issue is knowing what you have, knowing why this is what you have and this is what you're working with. If I know I can get better and I'm just too lazy, again, I am not doing my work ethically. Uncritical use, not knowing what we are working with and how to address quality issues, is unethical. It's knowing what I have and how am I dealing with it? Now, we want to ask, how is it different from any other context of using data to inform decision making? It's true for everything, right? Like any data you use should be true, right? Like if I'm doing business analytics for McDonald's, if I'm using data that is very inaccurate, I'm not doing a good job, right? That's not, outlandish. However, we want to be very clear that we know and understand all the limitations of the data and the analytic procedures used, as well as the implications in terms of interpretation. What's specific to our population that we should care about? For example, their limited ability to advocate for themselves, their limited ability to say decisions that are being made are actually affecting us in a very adverse way. Do they have the ability to say that? Do they have the ability to notice that, to make those connections? Are we generating systems that don't work properly and harm people, but we have no way of even knowing that? Because that's not a population that will be able to point out where the issue is. Can they be aware of where the issue is? So recognizing that the more we decouple and generate distance between people and the numbers we have and we manipulate and use in order to make decisions, the likelihood of us missing a lot of important points and what systematic efforts we are doing to reconnect, to better understand, and to make sure that things are as they should be. And always remember, there might be a lot of very specific to the population considerations that we want to keep in mind and in the conversation. Okay, and now us. How is homelessness measured? The BNL by name methodology, which is the methodology used by Built for Zero, measures homelessness as flows in and out of active homelessness. So rather than counting the number of people homeless tonight in Canada or in Halifax or in Dufferin County, Ontario, which is the point-in-time methodology, the PIT count, which is the most common used in the last 40 years methodology around counting people experiencing homelessness. The BNL methodology looks at flows rather than counting in a given day. We have the category of inflow, which is newly identified, people who so far have not been documented on the list, people who are returning from housing, so they used to be on the list, they moved to housing, they came back. And in our movement, it's about 20% on average that come back. Around 20% return from housing. That's an extremely important thing to be able to see and know. Return from inactive, people that lost contact with the system, sorted themselves out, incarcerated, hospitalized, and returned. So these are the inflows. Then we have the active homeless, people who are currently homeless. This is what the PIT count counts. People who are now actively homeless, and then the outflow. The move-ins, people who are moved into housing, people whose issue has been resolved from the perspective of the system, and then move to inactive, which is a bucket term for multiple reasons why someone is no longer in the system. So hospitalization, incarceration, sorted themselves out, moved out, just lost contact with the system. We have no idea what happened, but also died. Now, this is a way in which we are not being ethical. And one of the things we are trying to promote is having a different count of people experiencing homelessness who are deceased. While it is very true that when you die, you do move into inactivity, it's as true as could be, it's extremely disrespectful, but also it's not the same thing. There is a different measure here, and we should do better and count them separately. Okay? And we are working towards it. Our system is actually really simple. If the outflow is bigger than the inflow, we're solving homelessness. If it's not, we're not. The idea of the flows is how things look like from the perspective of the system, and recognizing that homelessness is precarity of housing. It's going in and out of homelessness. It's not a one-time situation, it's a tendency. And we should be extremely interested in the overtime pattern, in the overtime flow of people in the system. And look to see that we're not just circulating people, that they actually leave the system and not come back, and that we are proportional to the new people experiencing homelessness, people that are entering the system. For example, if we are moving people to housing en masse, but we are also having massive amounts of people becoming homeless, we should be very aware. It's a very well-functioning system, but there is an issue that is untapped. Why are so many people becoming homeless? So it's looking at flows, but also being aware that people return. People return from housing. People come back. So this is where the system is not doing something right. Why is someone returning? What didn't we do that could have established this as permanent independent housing? What is behind this failure to stay permanently housed? What did we do or didn't do that generated this issue? And of course, what are the costs to the system of this failed attempt to resolve? Also, not just also for the person, what is it like to feel I failed? I was finally moved into housing and here I am again. Like, what does that do? Now, we in Build for Zero, in order to arrive at the quality by name list, QPNL, we have a scorecard with 11 quality elements that are based on looking at community participation and coverage, looking at the provider participation, what do we do about unsheltered homelessness? Do we have good enough system in order to capture as much as possible? Are we being comprehensive in our list? Do we have a good inactivity policy? How long does it take before someone is declared inactive and removed from the list? And is it standardized? Is the data timely and accurate, of course? Do we have a unique identifier we are working with to make sure that we are not counting double or triple and so forth? Do we have the population data, the homelessness inflow, homelessness status and unflow, time on the list, are we doing that properly? And key connections at inflow, are we doing all that we need to do? And that in order to establish that the data is quality, like really making sure these things happen. And it's all about continuous improvement in the sense that it's over time being built. It's not starting that way. And also it needs to be kept that way because things can deteriorate and they actually do. Conforming BQ BNL, so we have a qualitative BNL scorecard and that's compared with, there is a note column, there is an outreach coverage and coordinated tool and provider participation. They submit and review the relevant policies documents that include minimum the common consent, common intake, timely and accurate data policy, inactivity policy, but also quantitative data reliability, 3 months balanced data within a 5% margin of error, a review of community anonymized BNL database and demonstration of how they extract BNL aggregate data points and set a baseline for active chronic homelessness so we could be monitoring what's happening with it. I'm going very quickly over this. If you're very interested in Build for Zero and the methodology, I'm giving the website in the end. The point here is that there is a lot that is being done in order to establish and say this is quality data. We do encourage data bravery. So it's building data culture on the community level. Importantly, we work with communities to start collecting their data in whatever level of imperfect quality it is at first, and gradually failing forward until QBNL is confirmed and henceforth maintained. The issue is making quality parameters explicitly observable and measurable and keeping transparent about them. The idea is not to say, is your data quality? You're not sure? Just give it up. It's not good enough. No. We are building towards it. We recognize it's a project, and it requires that bravery and working towards. It's about being explicit and transparent. I know the extent to which my data is not quality yet. I am aware of that. I measure that. It's something that I can look at. I know where I am. So it's not about saying don't use it. It's not about saying no. It's about saying yes, and let's do it better, and let's make sure we know we're doing it better. And being very, again, explicit, transparent. Specifically, metadata of the BNL, communities' monthly reliability changes. So the methodology calculates each month the percentage by which the current month's reported numbers deviate from the numbers projected, given the previous month numbers. We basically want to say that the data is consistent with the data we already had. Everyone is accounted for. If I had 7 people, 3 new people added, and 2 people moved into housing, and no one moved into inactive, I should have 8 people now. Do I have 8 people? And if I don't, I know something happened. Something in my numbers got wrong. Someone got lost, or there is an extra person. I am aware that something is up, and every month again, I am having that check, because again, I collect the numbers afresh every month and see, do they match up. We calculate a 3 months percentage deviation of projections, giving existing data, and it must not exceed 5%, which is currently still not normalized with population size. This is, again, something we're not doing well, and we need to improve on. Toronto will never exceed 5% because just the percentage of the population in general versus the amount we have, while a rural community will almost always be outside the 5% just by having one person misplaced. So we can improve on that, but and we should and we will. But the idea is it's a very simple way in which we constantly have some feedback on how quality and how reliable our numbers are. Yeah, perfect. This is probably too small. This is to show across our movement the number of unbalanced months in the last 24 months. So we have lots of communities with 0. They're perfect. We have communities with 1 or 2, which is fine. We also have communities 3 with 24. They were unbalanced every single month in the last 2 years. Their data is not quality. It's not good enough. It's unbalanced. They don't have things together yet. Knowing that is extremely important. Obviously, I'm not sharing the names of the communities, but knowing that is extremely important. Being aware of that, and not all of them are new communities. This is another important thing. I wanted to kind of show specific communities and show kind of the back and forth, but some people didn't like that I'll show it, so I don't. But the idea is that communities get to a quality place and then lose it because of the nature of the sector, because we know about the turnover, we know about the limitations of resources, we know about all the issues that make it difficult to keep it good. It's a drudge, the drudgery of achieving and maintaining quality data. The current excitement and hopes around the possibilities of data analytics to tackle and, as we in BFZ insist, solve homelessness, mostly depend on having quality data. Data we know we can trust and know exactly why, when, and about whom we can trust the data. Achieving and maintaining quality data, especially given sector conditions, requires systematic efforts and intentional vigilance. It's really recognizing it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work that requires that attention. It's connected with working conditions in the sector. Quality data is not decoupled from salaries in the homelessness sector. Those things are never connected when we talk about it, but they should be. Because one of the reasons why we should doubt the quality of data is because when people are extremely overworked and extremely overstretched and not amazingly paid, and so they're new or they're just about to leave because it's so bad, do you think they really, really fill all the questions in a stellar, amazingly accurate way? I worked frontline and I know I didn't. And I love data and I love accuracy. But it's also midnight and it's the end of a very long, painful weekend. And the intake was insane, and I'm actually finishing up when the people already went to bed. So some of the questions, I don't know the answer. And that's the realities of data collection on the ground, and they are connected with working conditions in the sector. And kind of having that wholesome perspective. If you want to learn more, Built for Zero, happy to talk about it in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. So we've got about 8 to 10 minutes for questions. I have a microphone, and I will circulate as best as I can because I see a whole host of hands coming up.
Thank you very much. My name's Louis Franciscotti. I'm an emergency physician from Edmonton. And Carter, your mother would be very proud of you. And Monica, your story was incredibly powerful. You're an incredibly powerful individual. Don't underestimate that. My question is this. I think we need to be very disruptive. I'm new to this field. But I think if we continue to do what we do, the results are going to get bad. We need to set a new standard, and I mentioned it this morning. If a patient shows up at a healthcare facility and they're experiencing homelessness, they're given the option, do you want to have a place to go to? And if they say yes, they don't leave that facility until they're given a place. And Jeffrey's, your article a while ago about using artificial intelligence, I'd like comments from you all, because right now we're running a program called Bridge Healing, where we've got 3 buildings. Patient comes into emergency, they're experiencing homelessness. We say, do you want a place? They say yes. We put them in a cab, send them to the place, give them all the services that you were running around trying to find, Monica.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to build building after building till there's no more patients. We're at the point where we know we have to use some sort of AI. So how do we develop a system that if the new standard across Canada is you can't leave a facility homeless, we're going to need a tool that connects all the information you collected and breaks through the addiction of chaos that most of my patients are facing and charts a path with Jonathan's guidance around let's be ethical. So I think that if we continue to meet and do this stuff, you'll be meeting for years. This was a crapshoot that I picked this session, and I think I won the lottery because you guys were brilliant, but I need advice. As an emergency doc, I've got 20% of my patients every shift that are experiencing homelessness. The nurses, social workers, and everyone else are under great moral distress because we patch them up and then we throw them right back out onto the street, and they come back the same day 2 or 3 times. Can we use AI to solve this problem?
So yes and no, right? Like I think, I do research in AI and machine learning. Talking about it sometimes makes me uncomfortable because as soon as you say it, it feels like it puts up a barrier, right? Like 85% of the people in the room are like, well, even if that worked, it's beyond the IT capacity of what I've got in-house right now. But I think to sort of peel back, I think, what you're asking is, can we do better at connecting people to the right services so we don't see them again, right? And put them in the right place, the place that they need. And data absolutely has a role to play in that. I don't think it needs even to be fancy. You can do if you wanted to use data, you could just sort of use pretty transparent sort of statistical things. You could ask, look at the person's history and see, here's a sort of a suite of possibilities that might fit this person. There's always got to be a human involved. So ideally, you would connect with a hospital social worker and say, this is who I've got. Can we connect it? Can we connect that person? I think maybe one place where AI could help, and this would probably start in the healthcare system, is just by making the system simpler for people to use, for caregivers to navigate. And I think having AI sort of narrow down a massive solution space to like a short list of things that might work for the person based on their characteristics. And then again, have the human caregiver sort of say, this, and this from that list. It reduces the cognitive burden on the person, right? Like I think, in housing, homelessness, and healthcare, I had my ear talked off by an ER doctor from Red Deer about this. And, people spend too much time fighting the machines, right? And if we can design better systems, AI may or may not be part of that. But if we can just reduce the cognitive burden on the person, then people can do what they do best, right? You can spend more time having conversations around your patients to really understand them, rather than fighting with Connect Care, which is shocking, so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for a very stimulating and informative discussion, presentations. I just wanted to ask, I have a few questions, but I'll hunt you down later. Carter, I have a question about, the map where you have located various services. I'm just wondering, because some services might, so like our office, for example, is located on Bay Street, those of you in Toronto, sorry. And then services are provided, like, let's say, in a Etobicoke. So does that count for that? Because then the little map would be in a Etobicoke. So, or does it count only in where the address of the organization is?
Yeah, absolutely. So how we did it was we had a couple of services that would have kind of like multiple places where services were provided. And how we tried to do it to the best of our ability was look at this specific location, there is this service, and this service accessible. And at this location, there's this service, and this service. One of the things that we actually came across as a challenge was that we would go to an organization website and they would list all of the services and they would say we have 3 locations and then we have no idea what services are at which location. So we did try, so it's not just the address of the organization, we tried to do it where the service is provided as best of our ability that we could find.
Thanks so much. I also think I hit the jackpot, and I'll look up data justice. I'm one of those people in health service who actually like data, which is not very common. So thank you for that. For now. And also thank you so much for the service user perspective and experience with the system. Carter, I think one of the things that I found is 211 and Connects Ontario are very kind of, there's a gap there. Mm-hmm. And so in general, city-funded, Ministry of Health-funded services that oftentimes overlap in service hubs are completely kind of mapped out in different spots. Mm-hmm. But people provide services together. So there must be some sort of a way to address that in innovative ways that is accessible. But my question is for Jeff, actually, to come to my question. So one of the biggest issues for large multi-service community organizations is different databases that do not speak to each other, and that impacts services. joint client records, integrated services, wraparound services. Oftentimes, those databases are funder mandated, HIFIS, right? So is your solution, am I hearing you correctly, is your solution to kind of patch up those databases so that they actually speak to each other? Because if that is the case, like, it's a game changer, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, the gold standard is to have real-time data connectivity between all of these systems. And all it costs is money, I suppose, to do that, to make it really, really simple, right? As an IT person, like, there's no technical reason why System A shouldn't talk to System B, but there's a lot of practical barriers when you start to dive into the details. It's not simple to build these enterprise-ready systems and have them communicate. There's got to be workarounds, right? So one solution is real-time sharing of data between incompatible systems, and you can use all the techniques that I talked about to merge close matches and have kind of a live updated thing. I think that would be amazing. That would be like the platinum, solution, right? But if you want like the bronze package, no check bag included kind of thing, right? System A, so if you want your databases integrated, like one of the questions to ask yourself, how often do they have to integrate, right? Do you need this updating like every half an hour? Or could you do it once a month? And if it's once a month, then most of these database systems will export some kind of file or report or something like that. So that sits in a file, so you've got a bunch of files lying around now, and then you scramble the names in one, you scramble the names in the other, you merge them together, and then you extract the data that you need to extract, right?
It has to be daily because teams work together.
Or
Yep.
It could be daily. So, for example, the Calgary Homeless Foundation has a couple of data systems that they use. The customer-facing one or the agency-facing one doesn't have all the flexibility that they want in terms of how they want to work with their data. And so every night, that thing basically just does a file export, and then they pull it into a different system, and then they do the merging. So there's lots of spaces. The faster you want it, the more it costs, basically, right? But the systems don't have to connect, as most people understand them connecting, for merging to happen. As long as they can export, then you can merge data.
Thank you, everybody. Carter, Monica, Jeffrey, Jonathan, thank you for your really great presentations and sharing your contact information. I know we can't get to all the questions. I'm sorry. I did a terrible job moderating, keeping everybody on track. But the presentations were really enlightening. Lots of really great learning. I want to thank you all and for sharing your information and your expertise in this. Thanks.
Thank you.